In 1932, the Australian government made a decision that would go down in history as one of the most bizarre military operations ever conceived. They mobilized their army, equipped them with Lewis machine guns capable of firing 500 rounds per minute, and sent them into battle. Their enemy? Not a foreign nation, not rebels or insurgents. Emus, flightless birds, and, somehow, against all odds and common sense, the emus won. This is the true story of the Great Emu War, where 20,000 birds outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and utterly humiliated one of the world's most professional militaries. And I promise you, the reality is even more absurd than you're imagining. To understand how Australia ended up at war with its own wildlife, we need to go back to the aftermath of World War I. Like many nations, Australia emerged from the Great War forever changed. Over 60,000 Australian soldiers had died, and hundreds of thousands returned home, wounded, traumatized, and in desperate need of support. The government's solution? The Soldier Settlement Scheme. They offered returning veterans farmland in Western Australia, particularly in the Campion and Walgoolan districts. The promise was simple: clear the land, grow wheat, build a new life. There were just a few problems. First, the land was marginal at best, hard, unforgiving soil that fought you for every crop. Second, the government promised subsidies that often arrived late, or not at all. And third, nobody told the emus about the Soldier Settlement Scheme. Emus are Australia's largest native bird, standing up to 6 feet tall and weighing around 100 pounds of muscle, attitude, and surprisingly cunning bird brain. Every year, they migrate inland after their breeding season on the coast, looking for food and water. And in 1932, after a dry summer, approximately 20,000 emus decided that the wheat fields of Western Australia looked like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Now, 20,000 might not sound like many birds, but imagine 20,000 6-foot-tall, 100-pound birds descending on your farm like a feathered locust plague. These weren't cute little sparrows pecking at seeds. Emus are big, fast, and hungry. Really hungry. They can run at speeds up to 30 miles per hour, travel 200 miles looking for food, and each bird can consume over a pound of vegetation per day. Do the math. 20,000 emus eating wheat equals one absolutely devastating agricultural disaster. But it wasn't just about eating the crops. The emus broke through fences that farmers had painstakingly built, creating gaps that let rabbits in to finish whatever the emus hadn't destroyed. They trampled young wheat plants, fouled water sources, and generally behaved like the world's worst house guests. By October 1932, the farmers had had enough. These were men who had survived the trenches of Gallipoli and the Western Front. They'd faced artillery barrages, poison gas, and some of the most brutal warfare in human history. But they were being defeated by birds. The local farmers, led by representatives from the Campion district, petitioned the government. Their request was straightforward: send military assistance to cull the emu population. After all, the government had promised to support these veteran farmers, and this was a genuine agricultural crisis. Enter Sir George Pearce, the Australian Minister of Defence. Pearce was a pragmatic politician facing pressure from rural constituencies. He saw an opportunity to help the farmers, get some positive press, and maybe provide some practical training for soldiers with machine guns. On October 17, 1932, Pearce approved the deployment of military forces, equipped with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The mission was classified as wildlife management. The Australian press, sensing a story, dubbed it the Great Emu War. It was meant as a joke. What nobody realized was just how accurate that name would turn out to be. The military forces assigned to this operation were led by Major Gwynedd Purves Wyn Aubrey Meredith, of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery. Yes, that's his real name. 4 first names. We'll just call him Major Meredith. Meredith was a decorated World War I veteran, a serious military man with a serious military bearing. He was also accompanied by Sergeant S. McMurray, Gunner J. O'Halloran, and a Fox movie-tone newsreel cameraman, because of course the government wanted footage of their glorious victory over emus for propaganda purposes. The Lewis gun was a serious piece of hardware. This was the same weapon that had been used extensively in World War I. It could fire 500 to 600 rounds per minute, had an effective range of 800 yards, and was designed to mow down advancing infantry. Surely military-trained soldiers with World War I machine guns versus flightless birds would be no contest. Right? Right? The military operation officially began on November 2nd, 1932. The strategy was simple. Locate emu flocks, set up machine gun positions, wait for the birds to come into range, and open fire. Easy. On the first day, the soldiers spotted a group of approximately 50 emus. Finally, a manageable target. They set up their position, waited for the birds to approach, and the emus scattered. In the chaos of machine gun fire, the birds split into small groups and ran in different directions at speeds the soldiers hadn't anticipated. When the smoke cleared, Major Meredith's unit counted their success. 12 birds, 50 emus, 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and they'd killed 12. But it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. The Fox movie-tone cameraman's equipment had jammed during the engagement, so they had no footage to show for it. The government's propaganda coup had literally misfired. Major Meredith, ever the professional soldier, analyzed the situation and concluded that the EMUs were employing guerrilla tactics. Yes, you heard that right. Guerrilla tactics. The birds were apparently using military strategy. Here's where the story gets truly bizarre. The emus learned, quickly. After the initial encounters, the emus began changing their behavior. They posted sentries. Individual birds would stand watch while the flock fed, and at the first sign of approaching vehicles or soldiers, they'd sound an alarm. And emus are loud when they want to be. They make this deep, drumming boom sound that can carry for miles. Once the alarm went up, the entire flock would scatter in what Major Meredith himself described as remarkably well-organized formations. Instead of running in a panic-stricken mob, they'd split into groups of about a dozen birds, each group running in a different direction at speeds approaching 30 miles per hour. The machine gunners couldn't track and target them effectively. But wait, it gets even better. The emus also learned to zigzag, not just run in straight lines, but actually weave and change direction unpredictably. Major Meredith noted in his reports that the birds seemed to understand the range of the Lewis guns and would deliberately stay just beyond effective firing distance. One soldier was quoted as saying, "The emus have proved that they are not so stupid as some had thought. Each mob has scouts, and at the first alarm they disperse in small groups, making them extremely difficult targets." To summarize, the birds had established a command structure, implemented early warning systems, and developed tactical dispersal patterns. The Australian military was being outmaneuvered by animals with brains the size of walnuts. Major Meredith was not a man who gave up easily. He tried different approaches. They attempted ambushes. The emus saw them coming. They tried mounting the Lewis gun on a truck to pursue the flocks. The rough terrain made accurate shooting impossible, and the truck kept breaking down. In one particularly ambitious attempt, a local farmer suggested they try to lure the emus into an ambush by driving them toward a dam where they'd be trapped. The emus simply went around the dam. The military was expending ammunition at an alarming rate. Records show they were using approximately 1,000 rounds for every 10 emus killed. Let me repeat that. 100 bullets per bird. For comparison, in World War I, it took an estimated 25,000 rounds to kill one enemy soldier, and that was considered wasteful. After 6 days of operations, Major Meredith reported that his units had used approximately 2,500 rounds of ammunition. His estimated kill count, maybe 200 EMUs, and that's a generous estimate. By mid-November, the Australian press was having the time of their lives. Remember, this was the Great Depression. Times were hard, news was depressing, and suddenly, here was a story about the military losing a war to birds. The Sydney Morning Herald wrote, "The machine gunners' dreams of point-blank fire into serried masses of emus were soon dissipated. The Emu Command had evidently ordered guerrilla tactics." One particularly cheeky headline suggested that the emus should be awarded medals for their service, since they'd faced Australian military fire and survived. In Parliament, members of the opposition had an absolute field day. One representative stood up and asked whether a medal had been struck for the conflict, and if so, would it be given to the emus who had won every round so far? Another asked, how is it that only 12 emus were killed after 10,000 rounds were fired? Would the minister please explain this remarkable marksmanship? The government was not amused. After 6 days of combat operations, on November 8, 1932, the military withdrew. The official reason was military priorities and poor results for ammunition expended. The unofficial reason? They were losing to birds, and everyone knew it. Major Meredith, trying to salvage some dignity, reported to Parliament that the emus could take multiple machine gun rounds and keep running. His exact words were, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." He was comparing the enemy to tanks. Tanks. The emus had achieved legendary status in military reports. The final tally of the first campaign was somewhere between 50 and 200 emus killed, though historians suspect even that might be generous. The military had fired thousands of rounds and had little to show for it except embarrassment and a very entertaining collection of press clippings. Round 2. They tried again. Here we go again. Now, you'd think that would be the end of the story. The military tried, the military failed, everyone had a good laugh. The end. But no. The farmers were still desperate, the emus were still eating crops, and the government was still under pressure. So, on November 12, 1932, just 4 days after withdrawing, the military was ordered back to the emu front, this time with reinforcements and more ammunition. Because if at first you don't succeed, try the exact same thing again, but with more bullets. The second campaign lasted until December 10th. This time, the military adapted their tactics. They used smaller, more mobile units. They tried dawn raids when the EMUs were less alert. They attempted to coordinate multiple units to trap flocks between them. And the results? The emus remained largely unimpressed. The birds continued their guerrilla tactics, continued posting sentries, continued scattering effectively. Major Meredith reported better results, but the press and public remained skeptical. When all was said and done, the military claimed to have killed approximately 986 emus over the course of both campaigns. However, this number has never been independently verified, and most historians believe it's significantly inflated. Even if we accept the military's numbers at face value, let's do the math. They expended approximately 10,000 rounds of ammunition. That's about 10 bullets per confirmed kill, which is still remarkably inefficient for trained soldiers using machine guns against large, flightless birds. More importantly, the original problem remained unsolved. The emu population was estimated at 20,000. Even if they'd killed 986, that's less than 5% of the total. The vast majority of emus continued their agricultural rampage completely unhindered. The operation was officially concluded in December 1932. The government declared it a qualified success, which in government speak means, we failed, but we're not admitting it. The military was withdrawn for the final time, and the emu situation was handed back to civilian authorities. The farmers were given bounty payments to hunt emus themselves, which actually proved far more effective than military intervention. Over the next few months, farmers claimed over 57,000 emu bounties. Turns out local knowledge and economic incentive work better than machine guns and military discipline. So what can we learn from the Great Emu War? First, the obvious. Don't use military force when civilian solutions would work better. The government spent thousands of pounds on ammunition, military wages, and equipment when simple bounty payments achieved far better results. Second, animals are far more adaptable than we give them credit for. The emus demonstrated problem-solving, learning, and coordinated group behavior that surprised experienced military personnel. They adapted to threats faster than the military could adapt to them. Third, sometimes your enemy isn't what you expect. The military's tactics and equipment were designed for warfare against humans. When faced with an enemy that operated by completely different rules, they were caught unprepared. The emus didn't behave like human soldiers, so traditional military doctrine was useless. But perhaps most importantly, the Great Emu War reminds us that nature is powerful, unpredictable, and often smarter than we think. These birds had no training, no weapons, no organization beyond their natural instincts. Yet they defeated a modern military force simply by being better adapted to their environment than the soldiers were. Today, the Great Emu War lives on in Australian cultural memory as a source of national embarrassment and humor in equal measure. It's been referenced in countless books, articles, documentaries, and internet memes. The emus, for their part, remain a protected species in Australia, numbering in the hundreds of thousands. They continue to roam the outback, blissfully unaware that they're the only enemy force to successfully defeat the Australian military on Australian soil. The Great Emu War stands as one of history's most ridiculous military engagements. A modern army equipped with machine guns and led by experienced WWI veterans deployed against large flightless birds and lost. Not just lost, but lost badly enough that they had to retreat. Twice. It's a story that sounds like fiction, but is absolutely, verifiably true. Official military reports, parliamentary records, newspaper archives, and eyewitness accounts all confirm that yes, Australia really did declare war on emus, and yes, the emus really did win. Major Meredith later maintained that the operation had achieved some success and provided valuable training. The press and public disagreed. In 1953, when asked about the Emu War in an interview, he said he stood by his actions and the birds were worthy adversaries. High praise from a military man who had served in the trenches of World War I. So the next time someone tells you that military superiority guarantees victory, remind them of November 1932, when the Australian Defence Force went to war with emus and lost. If you enjoyed this story of military absurdity, you're going to love the next episode of Funny War Histories, where we explore the Battle of Karansebes, where an army of 100,000 soldiers fought a brutal battle against themselves. Yes, it gets even more ridiculous than emus. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it, and if you know someone who needs to hear about Australia's military defeat at the hands of birds, share this video with them. They deserve to know the truth. Thanks for watching, and remember, respect the emus.